In the heart of Soweto, South Africa, on a frigid winter night, a faint cry pierced the stillness. It was the sound of a life left behind, an 8-day-old baby, swaddled in rags, abandoned in an alley. The child's cries echoed through the empty streets until Bongani Zulu, a retired teacher with a heart as vast as the African plains, stumbled upon her. Bongani had lived his life in service, molding young minds and nurturing futures. But this was different. He bent down, cradling the baby in his trembling hands. "Hush now," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You're safe. I've got you." At that moment, Bongani made a choice that would alter not just the child's destiny but his own. When he brought the baby home, the warmth of his resolve met the icy resistance of his wife, Thabo. "What were you thinking, Bongani?" she demanded, her voice sharp with disbelief. "We can barely care for ourselves, and now this." She gestured toward the infant, her disapproval radiating like heat from a fire. Bongani stood firm. "This child deserves a chance, Thabo. Just like anyone else." But Thandao's warning cut through his conviction like a blade. "You're inviting trouble. Mark my words, Bongani. This will not end well." Despite her protests, Bongani named the child Ayanda, one who is loved. And loved she was, at least by him. He poured his soul into raising her, teaching her to read, encouraging her dreams, and whispering affirmations into her small ears. "You can be anyone you want to be," he told her, his words brimming with hope. But Thandao's disapproval never wavered. When Bongani left for work, her words became daggers. "Don't get too comfortable here," she would sneer. "You're nothing but a burden." For Ayanda, life was a balancing act, a tightrope stretched between Bongani's warmth and Thandao's cold disdain. She clung to Bongani's kindness like a lifeline, but even the strongest ropes can fray. When Ayanda was 15, the unthinkable happened. Bongani, her only source of love and stability, passed away. At his funeral, Ayanda stood by his casket, her hands trembling as she clutched its edge. She felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, the crushing realization that her safe haven had vanished. As the mourners drifted away, Ayanda stayed behind, her eyes fixed on Bongani's lifeless form. "What happens to me now?" she whispered, her voice swallowed by the silence. In that moment, the path ahead seemed darker than she could bear, and the shadow of Thandao's disapproval loomed larger than ever. And so, the stage was set for a life defined by choices, some made for her, others forced by circumstance, and a few she would dare to make herself. But in that moment, standing at Bongani's grave, Ayanda could only wonder, would she ever find love and safety again? Welcome to House of Native African Tales, where storytelling connects us to our roots and celebrates the essence of African culture. Here, we bring you captivating narratives that explore the strength, resilience, and wisdom of our heritage. Each tale is a journey into the heart of Africa, filled with lessons and inspiration. Before we begin, subscribe to our channel and join a community that honors the power of storytelling. Tap the like button if you're ready for today's tale, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Now, let's begin. After Bongani's passing, the fragile line between Ayanda and despair snapped under Thandao's relentless cruelty. Without Bongani's warmth to shield her, Ayanda became an unwelcome guest in the very home that had once felt like a sanctuary. Day by day, Thandao's words grew sharper, her actions more unforgiving. The household chores that Ayanda once shared with Bongani's support became her sole responsibility. She scrubbed floors until her hands bled, cooked meals she wasn't allowed to eat, and cleaned rooms she wasn't permitted to rest in. Thandao watched her toil with cold indifference, her only contribution a steady stream of insults that pierced Ayanda's already fragile spirit. "You'll never amount to anything," Thandao spat one day, her voice heavy with disdain. Ayanda froze in place, a pile of laundry in her hands. The words echoed in her mind like a haunting melody she couldn't escape. "You're nothing but a burden. A mistake Bongani made. And now I'm the one paying for it." That night, as Ayanda lay on the thin mat in the corner of the kitchen that served as her bed, tears silently traced her cheeks. Her dreams felt farther away than ever, buried beneath the weight of Thandai's resentment. But within her heart, a glimmer of determination persisted, a fragile yet unyielding spark that refused to fade away. Years passed, and the cruelty never wavered. Ayanda learned to endure, to bury her pain and keep her head low. But by the time she turned 20, the walls of that house felt less like a home and more like a prison. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she made her choice. She gathered what little she had, a few clothes, a tattered photograph of Bongani, and a handful of coins she'd managed to save, and slipped out the back door. The night air was cool against her skin, carrying with it the bittersweet taste of freedom. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay. The journey to the city was long and uncertain, every step weighted with fear and anticipation. By the time she arrived in Johannesburg, her feet ached, and her stomach growled with hunger. The city's towering buildings and endless noise felt overwhelming, but Ayanda clung to the hope that this place, chaotic as it was, could offer her the fresh start she desperately needed. And then, as if by fate, she met him, Langengubane. He was standing outside a small cafe, his smile warm and inviting. "You look like you could use some help," he said, his voice smooth and reassuring. To Ayanda, Langa seemed like an answer to her silent prayers. His words were kind, his demeanor gentle. For the first time in years, someone looked at her with something other than disdain. Her heart swelled with cautious optimism. But life, as she had learned, was really so simple. Behind Langa's kind eyes and soft words lay intentions Ayanda could not yet see. And as she accepted his outstretched hand, she had no idea that the path ahead would challenge her in ways she couldn't begin to imagine. Her journey had only just begun. Ayanda's arrival in Johannesburg marked the beginning of a new chapter, but not the one she had dreamed of. The sprawling city, with its towering buildings and unending rush of people, seemed to offer endless opportunities. But for someone like Ayanda, alone, penniless, and vulnerable, it was an unforgiving labyrinth. In Langengubane, Ayanda thought she had found a lifeline. His warm smile and soft-spoken words disarmed her. He seemed to see her, truly see her, in a way that no one had since Bongani. When he offered her a place to stay, she hesitated but eventually accepted. His kindness felt like a balm on her wounded soul. For the first few days, life felt lighter. Langa provided food and a roof over her head, and Ayanda dared to believe that she had found a savior. But the illusion of safety didn't last long. On the fifth night, Langa's demeanor shifted. His tone, once gentle, carried an edge she hadn't heard before. "You need money, don't you?" he asked, leaning back in his chair as if her desperation was a given. Ayanda nodded cautiously, unsure where the conversation was heading. "I'll help you," he continued, his voice calm but commanding. "But you have to work for it." Work. The word carried weight, but Ayanda didn't fully grasp its meaning until he explained. He spoke of wealthy men, of exclusive parties, of the money she could make if she was willing to entertain these men. The room seemed to close in on her as he spoke. "This is how things work in this city," he said, his words slicing through her naivety. "You either sink or swim. I'm offering you a way to swim." Ayanda felt her stomach twist. The idea repulsed her, but hunger gnawed at her insides, and the reality of her situation loomed large. She had no job, no skills, no one to turn to. Langa's offer was a lifeline wrapped in chains, but it was the only one she had. After a long, agonizing silence, she whispered, "Okay." The word tasted bitter on her tongue, but she forced it out. She told herself it was temporary, just until she could find another way. But deep down, she knew that once she stepped into Langa's world, escape would be far from simple. The life Langa promised was nothing short of a nightmare. Ayanda was thrust into a world where her worth was measured in transactions and her identity reduced to a commodity. Men with sharp suits and sharper eyes viewed her as nothing more than a fleeting distraction. Each encounter left a scar, invisible but deep, carving away pieces of her soul. Yet, even in the darkness, Ayanda's resilience refused to crumble. She learned to survive, to numb herself to the indignities she endured. But survival came at a cost. Her laughter, once bright and genuine, dissolved into empty whispers. Her dreams, once vivid, dimmed into distant memories. The girl who had clutched Bongoni's casket and whispered prayers for a better life seemed like a stranger. Every day was a battle between resignation and the faint glimmer of hope that refused to die. Ayanda found small ways to hold on, tiny acts of defiance against the life she had been forced into. She would hum songs Bongoni had taught her as a child, their melodies reminding her of a time when love and kindness felt real. But the weight of her circumstances grew heavier with each passing year. The nights bled into mornings, and Ayanda began to lose track of time. Langa's promises of freedom, of better opportunities, proved to be empty words designed to keep her tethered to him. She was trapped in a cycle of degradation, unable to see a way out. One morning, after yet another sleepless night, Ayanda stood before a mirror in the tiny, dimly lit room that had become her prison. Her reflection startled her. The woman staring back was a stranger, her eyes haunted and distant, her face marked by exhaustion and pain. She traced a finger along the edge of the glass, her voice barely a whisper as she said, "I deserve better." The words hung in the air, fragile but powerful. For the first time in years, Ayanda allowed herself to believe them. She thought of Bongoni's voice, his unwavering belief in her potential. "You can be anyone you want to be," he had told her. The memory ignited something within her, a spark she hadn't felt in years. In that moment, Ayanda made a decision. She didn't know how or where, but she would leave. She would escape Langa's grasp and reclaim her life. The road ahead was uncertain, but she knew one thing with absolute clarity: she couldn't stay here. Not another day. Not another moment. Her journey toward freedom had begun. Ayanda's escape from Langa was not an act of sudden bravery but the culmination of years of silent desperation. The day she walked away, clutching a small bag of belongings and what little money she had managed to save, felt both exhilarating and terrifying. She had no concrete plan, only the unshakable resolve that she would never return to the life she had left behind. Starting over in Johannesburg was far from easy. The city, though familiar, seemed colder and more unyielding now. Ayanda found herself moving from one cheap lodging to another, always wary of the shadows that might still be tied to Langa's world. But despite the fear, she refused to succumb to hopelessness. She scoured job boards and spent long days walking into offices, boutiques, and cafes, asking for work. Rejection after rejection tested her resolve, but she pressed on. After weeks of relentless searching, her perseverance bore fruit. A position opened at Dumaseni Couture, a high-end fashion house known for dressing the city's elite. The job was modest, a clerk managing sales receipts and assisting customers, but to Ayanda, it was a lifeline. For the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of stability. She threw herself into her work, arriving early, staying late, and learning everything she could. The steady rhythm of her new routine became a balm for her weary soul. It was during one of her shifts at Dumaseni Couture that Ayanda first met Thabo. He was an unassuming presence at first, casually browsing racks of tailored suits and designer accessories. Thabo was polite, his inquiries about the products tinged with genuine curiosity rather than the dismissive arrogance she often encountered from wealthy customers. Ayanda assisted him with practiced professionalism, but something about his demeanor stayed with her in her mind long after he left. Thabo, the only son of one of South Africa's most successful engineers, had grown up surrounded by privilege. Yet he carried himself with an ease and humility that set him apart. Though he had no real need for Dumaseni Couture's offerings, he found himself returning to the store more often than he cared to admit. Each visit was another opportunity to see Ayanda, whose quiet strength intrigued him. He admired the way she carried herself, with grace, despite the weariness in her eyes. For Ayanda, Thabo's visits became a strange mix of comfort and confusion. He treated her with a kindness she wasn't used to, yet she couldn't bring herself to lower her guard. The walls she had built around her heart were thick, reinforced by years of betrayal and hardship. Still, Thabo's presence had a way of softening those walls, brick by brick. As weeks turned into months, Thabo's visits became more frequent. He would purchase small items, ties, cufflinks, handkerchiefs, things he likely didn't need but used as excuses to strike up conversations. Their exchanges were simple at first, revolving around mundane topics like the weather or fashion trends. But gradually, they deepened. Thabo began to share stories from his life, his struggles with living up to his father's legacy, his dreams of charting his own path. In turn, Ayanda found herself opening up, though cautiously, revealing glimpses of her thoughts and dreams. Thabo's interest in Ayanda was evident, but he never pressed her, never pushed for more than she was willing to share. His patience disarmed her, making her question the instincts that told her to keep everyone at arm's length. She began to look forward to his visits, her heart betraying her with a flutter each time he walked through the door. And yet, Ayanda's past loomed large in her mind. Every time Thabo made her laugh or reminded her that kindness still existed, she was pulled back into the shadows of her memories. The scars from her years with Langa and the shame she carried from choices she had been forced to make whispered doubts into her ear. How could someone like Thabo, with his bright future and untainted life, truly care for someone like her? She wanted to believe in the possibility, but the weight of her history held her back. The turning point came on an otherwise ordinary day. Thabo walked into the store, his expression softer than usual, as though he had made a decision and was at peace with it. After a brief exchange about the new arrivals in the store, he paused, looking directly into Ayanda's eyes. "Ayanda," he said, his voice steady yet warm, "I've been coming here for months now, and it's not because of the clothes." She froze, her heart pounding as he continued. "It's because of you. You're the most remarkable woman I've ever met. And I don't just mean your strength or your beauty, I mean the way you see the world, the way you carry yourself. I don't know your whole story, but I want to. I want to know you." Ayanda's lungs seized, her breath momentarily lost. His words were a balm and a burden, soothing her insecurities but also forcing her to confront the question she had avoided for so long: did she deserve this kind of love? Did she deserve him? As Thabo stood there, his sincerity shining through every word, Ayanda felt the weight of her past pressing down on her. The walls around her heart trembled, but they hadn't fallen yet. For the first time in a long while, she was faced with a choice, not one forced upon her by circumstance, but one she had to make for herself. Her journey, it seemed, was far from over. 8 months passed in a whirlwind of emotions, challenges, and discovery. Ayanda and Thabo's relationship deepened with every moment they shared. Despite her hesitations and the shadows of her past, Ayanda allowed herself to believe in the possibility of happiness. Thabo, ever patient and steadfast, became her anchor, the safe harbor she had spent a lifetime searching for. When he proposed, Ayanda was overwhelmed by a mix of joy and fear. Are you sure? She had asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. You don't know everything about me. But Thabo, with his characteristic warmth, took her hands in his and said, I know enough. I know your heart, and that's all that matters. Their wedding was simple yet beautiful, a celebration of love and resilience. For the first time in years, Ayanda felt as though she had found a place where she belonged, a partner who saw her not for her scars but for her strength. A year into their marriage, the glow of newlywed life was disrupted by the expectations of Thabo's parents. The Makonas, proud and traditional, were vocal in their desire for grandchildren, specifically a male heir to carry on the family name and legacy. The pressure began subtly, woven into casual conversations during family dinners. But over time, their insistence became harder to ignore. When can we expect some news? Thabo's mother asked one evening, her tone light but pointed. His father, less delicate, said outright, it's time for you to fulfill your duty, Thabo. A son is not just an expectation, it's a necessity for this family. Thabo brushed off their remarks with grace, but Ayanda felt the crushing force of their words settle like a pile of rocks within her. She had hoped, naively perhaps, that this conversation would never come. But now, faced with their demands, she knew she couldn't avoid the truth any longer. That night, as Thabo sat beside her in their bedroom, Ayanda felt the dam of her silence begin to crack. She had kept her past hidden, not out of deceit but out of fear that Thabo's love might not withstand the burden of her truth. I need to tell you something, she began, her voice barely audible. Thabo looked at her with concern, his hand reaching out to steady hers. You know you can tell me anything, he said gently. And so, Ayanda began to speak. She told him everything, the story of her abandonment, the abuse she endured under Thandai's roof, and her years of survival in Johannesburg. She described how desperation had led her to Langa, how she had become trapped in his world, and the choices she had made to survive. Finally, with tears streaming down her face, she confessed the most painful truth of all, the abortions she had undergone, the damage they had done to her body, and the devastating knowledge that she would never be able to conceive. When she finished, the silence between them was heavy, broken only by her quiet sobs. Ayanda couldn't bring herself to meet Thabo's eyes, fearing what she might see there, disappointment, anger, or, worst of all, rejection. But when Thabo finally spoke, his voice was steady, though tinged with pain. Ayanda, he said, his hands cupping her face and forcing her to look at him, you've carried so much alone. Too much. But you don't have to carry it anymore. I married you for who you are, not for what you can give me. You are enough. You will always be enough. Ayanda wept in his arms, the weight of her secrets lifting, if only slightly. For the first time, she felt the full depth of Thabo's love, a love that saw her, truly and completely, and refused to waver. The days that followed brought a fragile sense of hope. Thabo suggested adoption as a way to build their family, a solution that felt both practical and meaningful. But when he shared this idea with his parents, their reaction was anything but supportive. Adoption? His father scoffed, his tone thick with disdain. We are Makonas. Our bloodline is our legacy. A child not of our blood has no place in this family. Thabo's mother, though gentler in her approach, echoed her husband's sentiments. Thabo, think carefully about what you're suggesting. This isn't just about you. It's about preserving everything your father has built. The confrontation escalated, emotions running high as Thabo stood firm in his decision. Ayanda is my wife, he said, his voice resolute. We will build our family the way we choose, not the way you dictate. His father's response was swift and cutting. If you refuse to fulfill your duty, you leave me no choice. I find someone else to take your place at the head of this family. You lose everything, your position, your inheritance, everything. Ayanda, overhearing the argument, felt a familiar pang of guilt. She had fought so hard to leave behind the shadows of her past, but now they threatened to consume not just her but the life she and Thabo had built together. That night, she approached Thabo with a heavy heart. "I don't want you to lose everything because of me," she said, her voice trembling. But Thabo's response was unwavering. "You are the woman I chose, Ayanda. And I would choose you again, 1,000 times over. My father can take away everything else, but he cannot take you from me." Ayanda's heart ached with the weight of his words, torn between gratitude and guilt. As their love faced its greatest test, the question loomed large: could they stand together against the forces threatening to tear them apart? The battle had just begun, and their future hung in the balance. The Makona family had always been synonymous with power and legacy. Their name was etched into South Africa's industrial history, their wealth and influence cemented over generations. For Thabo's father, Engineer Makona, the preservation of this legacy was not just a desire, it was an obsession. In his eyes, every decision Thabo made was a reflection of the family's future, and his marriage to Ayanda was a glaring imperfection in the pristine narrative he had cultivated. The ultimatum came on a stormy evening, though the weather outside was nothing compared to the storm brewing within the Makona estate. Engineer Makona summoned Thabo to his study, his tone curt, his words razor-sharp. "Thabo," he began, his voice carrying the weight of authority, "you've had your fun, but this ends now. It's time for you to choose, your family or your wife." Thabo's breath caught, but he steadied himself. "What are you saying, Baba?" "I'm saying you have a duty," his father snapped. "This family's legacy is bigger than you. Bigger than her. If you insist on staying with that woman, you will lose everything I've worked for. Everything I've built for you. I'll strip you of your position at the company, cut you off from your inheritance, and find someone else, someone who understands what it means to be a Makona." The words hung in the air like a guillotine, and Thabo felt a suffocating pressure anchoring him in place. But even in the face of his father's wrath, his resolve did not waver. "I love Ayanda," he said, his voice firm but calm. "I will not leave her. No one controls my choices, not even you." The confrontation escalated, both men raising their voices as years of buried tension and unspoken expectations came to the surface. Engineer Makona accused Thabo of weakness, of selfishness, of betraying the family's name. But Thabo stood his ground, refusing to let his father's threats dictate his life. Meanwhile, Ayanda sensed the growing tension within the family. She could feel the strain in Thabo's shoulders, hear it in his voice when he spoke of the latest arguments with his parents. And though he reassured her time and again, she couldn't shake the guilt that gnawed at her. She had fought so hard to leave behind a life of pain and sacrifice, only to find herself at the center of a new kind of battle, one that threatened to destroy everything Thabo had worked for. Late one evening, as they sat together in their living room, Ayanda finally spoke the words she had been holding back. "Thabo, maybe your father is right." Thabo turned to her, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about?" "Maybe I'm not the woman you need," she continued, her voice trembling. "I've brought nothing but trouble into your life. Your parents hate me. Your father is willing to throw away everything you've built because of me. I can't let you lose it all. I won't." Thabo's expression softened, and he reached for her hand. "Ayanda," he said gently, "don't do this. Don't blame yourself for their choices. I don't want to come between you and your family," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I'll go if that's what it takes. I'll leave." But Thabo's grip on her hand tightened, his voice unwavering. "You are my family now. You, Ayanda. No one controls my choices. Not my father, not anyone else. I love you, and that's final. Ayanda's tears fell freely as Thabo pulled her into his arms. She wanted to believe him, to let his love wash away her doubts. But the fear remained, a shadow she couldn't shake. The rift between Thabo and his parents deepened with each passing day. Engineer Makona, true to his word, began taking steps to remove Thabo from his position as CEO of the family's company. Board meetings became battlegrounds, with Thabo fighting to protect his role while staying true to his principles. The strain was palpable, and Ayanda could see how much it weighed on him, even if he tried to hide it. His mother, caught between loyalty to her husband and love for her son, tried to mediate, but her efforts only seemed to inflame the situation. Thabo, she pleaded during one heated conversation, please, think about what you're doing. Your father isn't trying to hurt you. He's trying to protect the family. I am protecting my family, Thabo replied, his voice laced with frustration. Ayanda is my wife, and she is my family. Why can't you see that? But his words fell on deaf ears. To his parents, bloodlines and legacy mattered more than love. One afternoon, Ayanda's phone rang, the caller ID displaying a name that sent a chill down her spine, Engineer Makona. She hesitated before answering, her heart drumming against her ribs. Ayanda, his voice was cold, calculated. We need to talk. Privately. Can you meet me tomorrow? She agreed, though the uncertainty of what lay ahead made her stomach churn. What could he want? Another ultimatum. A chance to demean her, to remind her that she didn't belong in their world. Or, perhaps, something else entirely. As Ayanda ended the call, she couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting would be a turning point. For better or worse, her choices, and her love for Thabo, were about to be tested once again. Ayanda arrived at the meeting place with trepidation, the weight of Engineer Makona's call clung to her, a heavy knot in her stomach. She had prepared herself for sharp words, for the icy disdain she had come to associate with Thabo's father. What she didn't expect was the calculated precision of his approach, a man determined to dismantle her life under the guise of care. He greeted her without warmth, his eyes scanning her as though sizing up an opponent in a game he already expected to win. Ayanda, he began, his tone clipped but measured, you're a smart woman. So, let's not waste time. Ayanda remained silent, her fingers gripping the edge of her chair, her heart pulsing furiously within her. Engineer Makona leaned forward, his gaze piercing. I know you love my son. I don't doubt that for a second. But sometimes, love isn't enough. He placed an envelope on the table between them. If you truly love him, let him go. Ayanda's throat tightened, but she refused to speak, letting him continue. Thabo has a future, a legacy to uphold. Staying with you will destroy everything he's worked for, everything I've worked for. You can't want that for him. He opened the envelope, revealing a blank check. The pen beside it gleamed like a weapon, its implication sharp and clear. Write whatever amount you think you'll need to start over. Consider it a gift. And, he added, sliding a plane ticket across the table, this is your way out, a ticket to the United States. A fresh start. Ayanda's heart sank as the magnitude of his offer settled over her. Engineer Makona wasn't just asking her to leave Thabo, he was offering her a way to erase herself from his life entirely. A clean break, carefully constructed to ensure she could never return. If you love him, Makona said again, his voice softer now, almost gentle, you'll do this. It's not about you, Ayanda. It's about what's best for him. The hours that followed were an agonizing blur for Ayanda. She paced her apartment, the check and ticket sitting untouched on the counter, their presence a haunting reminder of the choice before her. Her mind replayed Makona's words, his insistence that leaving was the ultimate act of love. But was it? Could sacrificing her happiness truly secure Thabo's future, or was this just another way to push her aside, to erase the parts of him that didn't fit neatly into his father's plans? Her thoughts swirled like a storm, each argument crashing against the other. She thought of the life she and Thabo had built, the laughter, the quiet moments, the unwavering support he had shown her. Was she willing to give that up, even for his sake? Or was holding on to their love a selfish act that would cost him everything? When Thabo returned home that evening, Ayanda's resolve broke. She told him everything about the meeting, the check, the ticket, and his father's ultimatum. Her voice trembled as she recounted the words that had cut her to the core. He said, "If I love you, I should leave. That staying will ruin you." Thabo's face darkened with anger and pain, but he said nothing, allowing her to continue. Tears streamed down Ayanda's face as she added, "Maybe he's right. I can't let you lose everything for me. I won't. If it means protecting your future, I'll go." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she turned away, unable to face him. But Thabo crossed the room in an instant, pulling her into his arms. "No," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Don't say that. Don't even think it." "But your father," Ayanda began, her words muffled against his chest. "Is wrong," Thabo interrupted, his tone firm. "He's wrong about you, about us, about everything. My future isn't tied to his approval or his money. It's tied to you. You're my future, Ayanda. You always have been." Tears blurred her vision as she looked up at him, searching his face for any trace of doubt. But there was none. Thabo's eyes burned with determination, his love for her shining brighter than the shadows threatening to consume them. "You're worth everything, Ayanda," he said, his voice steady. "If I have to walk away from my family's legacy, so be it. You're my choice. And I'll make that choice every single day." For the first time since the meeting with Engineer Makona, Ayanda allowed herself to hope. The road ahead was uncertain, the obstacles daunting, but in Thabo's arms, she found the strength to believe that love, true, unwavering love, could withstand even the fiercest storms. The days following Ayanda's confrontation with Thabo's father were marked by uncertainty, but also by a quiet determination that bound Ayanda and Thabo even closer together. Their love had weathered storms, and now, it stood stronger than ever. Together, they decided to move forward with the adoption process, a decision that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. The journey to adoption was not without its challenges. There were forms to fill, interviews to attend, and a waiting period that seemed endless. But through it all, Thabo and Ayanda supported one another, their shared goal pulling them forward. When the day finally arrived, and they welcomed their child into their lives, a wide-eyed little girl with an infectious laugh, it was as if the missing piece of their puzzle had fallen perfectly into place. The laughter of their daughter brought light into their home, a light that softened the sharp edges of their struggles. Ayanda, who had once questioned whether she deserved happiness, now embraced her role as a mother with an open heart. Every bedtime story she read, every tear she wiped, each moment she poured into nurturing her child reflected the deep resilience and undeniable grace that defined her journey. Meanwhile, the dynamics within the Makona family remained complex. Thabo's father, as resolute as ever, refused to acknowledge the adoption. To him, it was a betrayal of tradition, a break from the lineage he had worked so tirelessly to preserve. His estrangement from Thabo persisted, a painful rift that neither father nor son seemed willing to bridge. Thabo's mother, however, began to see things differently. During quiet moments, she reflected on the joy her son radiated when he spoke of Ayanda and their child. For years, she had prioritized legacy and appearances, but now, she couldn't ignore the love and contentment that Ayanda had brought into Thabo's life. Her visits were hesitant at first, marked by awkward exchanges and tentative smiles. But over time, she began to see Ayanda not as an outsider but as someone who had stood by her son through trials few could endure. She saw the tenderness with which Ayanda cared for her child, the way her love for Thabo remained unwavering despite the challenges they faced. Slowly, the icy distance between them began to thaw. One evening, as Ayanda sat by her daughter's bedside, watching her drift off to sleep, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. Her journey had been one of pain, resilience, and unyielding hope. She thought of Bongani, the man who had given her a chance at life, and Tendai, whose cruelty had pushed her to seek freedom. She thought of Langa, whose betrayal had almost broken her, and Thabo, whose love had pieced her back together. Every choice she had made, every struggle she had endured, had led her to this moment. She whispered softly, her voice filled with gratitude and conviction, "Every choice brought me here. And for the first time, I feel whole." The story of Ayanda and Thabo is not just one of love but of choices, choices that define who we are and who we aspire to be. Thank you for spending time with us at House of Native African Tales, where stories come alive to inspire, challenge, and connect. Ayanda's journey stands as a vivid reminder of the resilience embedded in the human spirit and the profound impact of the choices that carve the path of our existence. Now, we leave the question to you: would you have chosen love like Thabo, sacrificing legacy for the person who makes your heart whole? Or would you have chosen legacy like his father, preserving tradition and family expectations at all costs? Your voice matters. Share your thoughts. What would you choose, love or legacy? If this story moved you, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to House of Native African Tales. By subscribing, you'll be part of a community that treasures the depth and beauty of African storytelling. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you'll always know when a new story is ready to unfold. Thank you for watching, and remember, every tale holds a lesson, and every lesson makes us stronger.